Yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Variety Hour, and a spiritual episode today. We've got the author of a book, The Red Fox, the biography of Norm Smith, who's legendary Melbourne coach. Ben Collins is with me, and this book came out 2008, I think was the original version.
That's correct, Titus, yep.
And there's a revised and updated version. It's got new chapter in it, all been updated. It's out now through Slattery Media Group in all good stores. Ben Collins, great to have you with me. This is a painstakingly researched book into one of my heroes, Norm Smith, and Melbourne. We'll take people through if they don't know a lot about Norm Smith. Obviously, the grand final best player medal is named after Norm Smith. So, what drew you to Norm Smith? Why did you actually write a book about Norm Smith?
It was actually suggested to me.
Right.
I worked with Slattery Media Group, and there were a couple of different forces at play that were keen to have a book written about Norm Smith. And my boss, Jeff Slattery, came to me and said, how would you like to write a book about Norm Smith? And the first thing that came into my mind was, I can't believe there hasn't been a book written about Norm Smith being the legend that he was. And that sort of started set the wheels in motion. And there was a bit of a deputation of the old Melbourne greats who came in for a little bit of a powwow and meet and greet, and we discussed what was possible and just get to know a little bit about the man.
So was that people from the club?
Yeah,
at the time?
I think it was Bluey Adams and might have been Ron Barassi there, and Asa Mann might have been there. There was about half a dozen players and so forth. And then it was a matter of, it probably took me, I'd say 12 months full time, but that was probably spread over maybe 16, 18 months because I was also combining work footy record. And initially it was a matter of, okay, there's a bit of time distance here from the period that we're covering, so let's get to the oldest folks first to get their stories down.
Because how many interviews did you do? Because it
would have been around 100.
Right.
And added on top of that, and that's, often they were 1 to 2 hour interviews over coffee and cakes and whatnot, and I put on a little bit of weight during that period.
Right.
But and there was also plenty of hours spent looking at archives and microfiche old newspapers in the State Library and the MCC Library. I was basically chasing every rabbit down its warren.
Because the book is both, I think it does a couple of things right. It's insanely detailed, so you get the real,
it's very long.
But also it's the definitive piece. Like, it's got all the key people pretty much interviewed that you could get to. It's got all that detail. It's actually quite, even though it's long, it's quite a light read. Like, your writing is not, it's very accessible. So I didn't find while I was reading it going, oh, there's just so much detail. Like, sometimes you read a non-fiction book and you're just like, they could have chopped this down to about one page. But you bring together that early time when Norm Smith was born and, growing up in North, getting all these sort of things is really well done. But and we'll get into some of that. But doing all these interviews was kind of amazing. It must have taken a long time. How did you get into writing about sport? Because you mentioned you write for the Record as well. You're currently at AFLmedia.com or part of that.
Yeah.
So what do you work on there?
Mainly during the footy season, it's the Footy Record.
Yeah.
And now leading into round one, it's with all systems go, and a day a week on a weekend I'll cover a game.
Yeah. And you're not a Melbourne supporter though.
No, although I sort of say foolishly or silly that I'm, in retrospect I am.
Yeah.
It's easy to be during the period.
But who do you vote for?
Collingwood. The enemy,
the arch enemy.
However, it needs to be qualified that Norm Smith was a Collingwood supporter.
He was in his early days, but you've kind of not playing up to the stereotype, writing a whole book as a Collingwood supporter. You're ruining the image I have of it.
That, but Norm was the Collingwood period of the machine team left a huge impression upon him, and all this team ethic. And his favourite player of all time was Albert Collier, Lita Collier.
Yeah.
And he was a big fella who opened paths for his teammates and handball, and Norm actually used that as a player. He became a very unselfish player later on. And, some of that, I also look at, it's almost like coaching family tree. You know, there's almost a link there from Jock McHale to Norm Smith. McHale coached Dan Minogue at Collingwood. Dan Minogue coached Checker Hughes at Richmond. Checker Hughes coached Norm Smith at Melbourne, and you can probably take it further any way you like.
Well, Norm then Barassi
Norm coached
Junior.
Barassi.
He went on to coach at Carlton.
Barassi coached Pagan. Pagan coaches Clarkson and Longmire. It goes on, and how many threads sort of
that come out of
remain.
it.
Yeah.
What was your background in sport? How did you originally get into it? Were you?
I love talking about this now. This is highly self-indulgent, but I've lived all my life in the western suburbs and grew up. I had the typical Aussie sporting upbringing. Played cricket in the summer and footy in the winter, and as a junior, I had a little bit of potential in both, but eventually I think I was exposed as too mentally and physically soft. But I probably had more talent as a cricketer, and I was in some state junior squads and captain Essendon in the Dowling Shield under-16 comp. And
so you were obsessed with sport growing up? But
another story against myself. My poor captaincy in the Dowling Shield semi-final probably cost us playing against Melbourne at the MCG when Brad Hodge was their captain, and I would have been opening the batting against a fast bowler named Brad Williams, who probably would have ended my life that day. So, and footy, it goes back, my great-grandfather played in the early 1900s, sort of 4 generations of players. My old man was a tough fullback for Sunshine, and, I played, almost made the Victorian primary schools team. Of course, I was played out of position in those trial games.
I'm sure. That's what I used to say on every game I played.
But my tiny little primary school, we only had 170 kids, and we won 12 games in a row, and we made the state final. We didn't win, but it's a bit of a fairy tale story. I planned to actually write about that one day, Titus.
Your sort of background history.
Life lessons. And, so in the end, ended up playing a premiership with Melton with some former league players, and I just hung in there, and one of my teammates described me as an outside back pocket player, which is pretty harsh. Back pocket players should be...
I know, also outside.
So, but the point is, I wasn't good enough, but the next best thing is speaking to people who are.
And writing about it. So it comes through in the book how much you love it, and let's get into Norm, because Norm's just this character that, I think his name still resonates today, not just because of the grand final, best player medal named after him, but, there's a lot that goes in with Norm. And he was born February 9th, 1912, so had a very tough upbringing, partly because of when he was born. What didn't he? The world events that surrounded his growing up were he was born in that interesting generation.
Well, actually, I think you've got Len's birth date there.
Oh, is that Len's, is it?
Norm was, November 9th.
November, sorry, yeah.
1950.
So Len's his older brother, and who was a good footballer as well. But so Norm really grew up with straight into World War I, into the Depression, and then World War II, didn't he? So he kind of didn't have an easy... That generation didn't have an easy trot into life, really, did it?
They didn't, and it was a very frugal time, and as he grew up, he saw that sport was a way to elevate himself, so to speak. And of course, during the Depression, if you're playing football and getting paid a little bit to do it, sort of helped.
Made a huge difference.
A little bit of extra sustenance, so to speak. And and they played initially with Dennis Football Club, and then moved on to Northcote Seconds, and then it was Checker Hughes who has just started coaching Melbourne. Him and Percy Page, the great secretary, turned up on the Smith doorstep.
So this was in the VFA days. Northcote were in VFA. And what were Northcote called in the VFA? They were...
the brick fielders?
Yeah, because it was a big area of mining, brickworks and all that sort of stuff. But just before we get to, when Checker Hughes shows up, you mentioned before he was a Collingwood supporter. He used to go to Victoria Park both to watch games, but he used to go down and watch training, didn't he? He used to watch Jock McHale
after school,
coach the team through training, and that was a huge impact on him, wasn't it?
It was. A group of them would catch the train to Victoria Park from Northcote, and it's only a couple of stops, and it still is. They'd watch every movement of their favourite players, and Norm would even back in those days when he's 10 or 12 years old, he'd pay close attention to Jock McHale and the players' interactions with Jock McHale, and it stuck in his mind how scared the players were of Jock. they were very wary of him, especially after a loss when he would really drill them hard. So
he wouldn't even sometimes speak to them on the night after a loss, would he, or straight after?
Yeah, well, I think he told Jack Regan after he missed the shot to win the game that go and throw yourself in the Yarra Sun or something like that. I mean, so
but Jock was that. How good was that Collingwood team that Norm grew up watching? Because that was the machine. That was you know, arguably some people would argue. I know Eddie Maguire does.
Yeah.
The best team there ever was.
Yeah, well, you've got Coventry's and Colliers. Those guys, for starters, I mean Brownlows, and they cover all positions of the ground.
Yeah.
Just so inspirational and champions, but they were all team orientated. And this is the key. They weren't a one man show. There were stars on every line, and they worked together beautifully. And all these little influences just played on a young Norm Smith.
So that really rubbed off on him, didn't it? That was really, he talked about that, and you lay that out in your book quite well. Jock McHale was the sort of the one that he looked to, and that team first idea was something that he not only did impress upon people as coach, but he did as a player, which we can get into. But you mentioned his brother Len. His brother Len was older than him, and Len was a completely different character. How would you describe Len's character as opposed to Norm, especially when they were growing up, but really all throughout their lives?
Polar opposite. As Norm's son Peter describes it, he said Len was quiet, Norm was loud. Len didn't drink, Norm drank. Len smoked, Norm didn't smoke. They were completely different coaching styles as well. There were blokes who played under both of them in state teams, and they would just marvel at absolute opposite style they had. Len was very much one-on-one kind of coach and speak very quietly to his players, whereas Norm would, fire and brimstone would be a little bit overstating it, perhaps, because there was a lot of method to the madness.
Yeah.
But to have these two guys be brought up the same way under the same roof and yet be completely different, opposite characters, and yet have such mutual respect and love for each other, it's quite amazing.
Yeah, it's also amazing coming through. You talk about that fire and brimstone, that Norm from the Jock McHale days and right through, he did believe that players had to be, it was a combination, coaching he saw as a combination of, they had to actually be scared of you, but they also had to know that you, beyond that, on a more long-term basis, had their best interests at heart, that you actually did really care about them, but you still needed to scare them. And it reminded me a bit of Clarko in some ways. Do you think that's still true, and that it's harder to do these days because, you know, people kind of expect more inclusive environment where you can't just... The sprays that Norm used to give, you couldn't give them today, could you?
There'd be mutiny. And that's serious. There would be. The generations changed, I think, even back in Norm's time. People were changing. The protest era, people start asking why and questioning, rather than just doing things and coming out. Because Norm coached a lot of blokes who went through national service. They just did what they were told and they were conditioned to it.
Right.
Whereas once Vietnam starts and people are questioning why the authorities are doing this and that and the other, and that filters through to other areas of society, and the footy coaches had to suddenly start explaining why they were doing things and why players should do this or that.
I just imagine if you suddenly drop Norm into any team in the league today, how long it would actually last.
I reckon he's smart enough to adapt. I've got to defend the great man. I reckon it was a time where there weren't a lot of tactics in footy, and Norm took the game into very much a defensive era, so maybe I think he would have been a terrific coach.
Even today.
Yeah. He was one of the, about 1964, he became pretty much a full-time coach. I think he...
So not working outside of that, actually.
He was managing his own business.
Yeah, but one of the first to sort of,
business, and but he focused a lot of time on coaching, and he was a very smart tactical coach. He had he trained players very hard to start. That doesn't take a lot of brains to do that, but that was a big key to it as well. That even when he coached state teams, the players from other teams couldn't believe, they're saying to Ron Barassi and these guys, how do you guys put up with this kind of training? State training's supposed to be a gentle jog or whatever. He had them really busting a boiler. And and the other thing was a number of things why he was a great coach, but he also had sort of visions of what a player could do, even though
Right.
the player couldn't see it themselves. I mean, he switched players around that, like John Beckwith, for instance, moved centre or half forward flank to the champion back pocket player. Stewie Spencer went from back pocket to rover and became a champion.
Yeah, so you could sort of see what
and
players
Barassi,
needed.
I mean, the Barassi moved to become, second ruck, or the ruck rover, as we call it. I mean, there's a great story behind that as well, and it wasn't entirely Norm's idea. His runner, Hugh McPherson, had performed the same sort of role back in the early 40s, and he suggested it to Norm that they couldn't find. Barassi was like a square peg in a round hole. They just couldn't find the right
spot
position
for him. Yeah,
trying him everywhere, and he was just.
And this is when position play was a lot more. People stayed in their positions a lot more.
That's right. But Barras, he would crash into his own teammates, and he was, full of vigour and not so much discretion. And they found that this ruck rover role, second, he didn't actually compete in the ruck, which a lot of second ruckmen did in those days.
Right.
He just followed the play around.
So let's go back to when Norm's a young kid. His brother Len is playing for Northcote in the VFA, and he's really doing quite well, and is starting to impress people enough to the point where the Melbourne Football Club come knocking. And this is Checker Hughes rocks up at their house, and it's very exciting. You know, you've got this big club coming and seeing them, and even though the VFA was still a big, much more rival league at that point, the VFL was seen as even then the Premier League.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
And you have Melbourne Football Club royalty show up. Checker Hughes is there. He is very interested in recruiting Len, but he sees Norm kicking the football on a gravel sort of oval, doesn't he?
In a paddock.
And just sees him and thinks, this kid's got something.
Because, they rocked up at the door, and Vic Smith, their father, said, well, if you're going to take Len, I'd like you to also look at Norm.
Right.
He didn't exactly say it was a package deal, but that was perhaps the inference. They had a look at how Norm went about it, and they thought, gee, this kid's got a bit of talent, so they got him down there as well. And in the end, Len got the flick from Melbourne, and they kept Norm, and they probably held on to the right one.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing how well Norm did. So that's Norm's sort of entry into it. He goes in and he starts playing, and Checker Hughes had come over. He'd been at Richmond before that, and it was a bit of a coup getting him across.
It was.
Richmond couldn't find a job for him. Was that true?
That's correct. He just, he'd had a couple of grand final losses to Collingwood, and then he finally coached them to a premiership in 1932.
Mm-hmm.
And, Richmond could not get Checker a job, and Percy Page had made the move from Richmond. He was their great secretary. He'd moved from Richmond to Melbourne. He'd been there for a year, and Percy said to Checker, I'll get you a job. So he got him a job in his printing press.
Right.
Printing
factory. So these were jobs off the field because they were like people who needed to work, and the footy clubs could get. In these days, you could get someone a job. Yeah, there wasn't the salary cap.
Ken Wood wasn't looking over these kinds of deals, but so that was the simple thing. Fancy coaching a premiership and then leaving. But Checker actually did it 3 times. It's unbelievable. The only person to have done it, because then when he coached, I'm jumping ahead, but he coached 39 to 41 premierships. Yeah. Then he left to go into his hotel business. Then he came back again and coached 48 premiership, then retired again.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I think Charlie Climo might be the only other one to coach a premiership then move on or something like that.
Right.
So, but where were we?
Checker was a huge influence on Norm, wasn't he? Coached him for a very long time. And at first, Norm just was sort of a reserve player, slowly made his way into into the senior team.
Yep.
And then another team was interested in him. Essendon were interested in, was it Essendon interested in recruiting him? And Norm was even considering doing it.
Well, yeah.
And that meeting was kind of interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was. Norm was a great mate. He grew up in Northcote with Ron Baggett, who became a Melbourne champion, and they were a great forward combination. But Ron Baggett's brother, Jack, he was 10 years older than Ron. He was coaching Essendon. played under Checker at Richmond, now coaching Essendon.
And Essendon had been struggling for quite a while at this point, hadn't they?
Right, yeah. I mean, they had Dick Reynolds, but they didn't have much else. And so, Jack Baggett was asking, he said, I need some players. And he said, well, maybe you could have Len Smith. Checker said that to Jack Baggett. And Baggett said, oh, what about his brother Norm? And Checker said, so where would you play him? And Jack Baggett said, oh, he'd be my full forward. He said, well, you can't have him. So Checker played him at full forward in the next trial match, and Norm starred, and that was his position for the rest of his career.
Checker sort of took that as a bit of said he'd think about it, didn't he? And then went and tested Norm at full forward and decided, oh, he's right, he'd be really good. I'm not trading him.
Very canny, street cunning from Checker.
So you've got him starting to really make his way in the Melbourne side, and this is the thing. A lot of people know Norm as an amazing coach. That's if you know of him just in passing these days. That's what he's known as. But rereading your book again, because I read it when it originally came out, but going through it again, it really struck me again how good a player he actually was. He wasn't a journeyman. You know, you hear about Kevin Sheedy being, in the nuggety back pocket, and you hear about other coaches that were, Alistair Clarkson's an example, a tough, decent player, but hardly a star.
Yeah.
But Norm really was a star. He really was a star of a player, wasn't he?
And it's a great point you make, because his playing career often gets sort of overlooked.
Yeah.
For his amazing coaching career, which is probably fair enough, but he was a unique player. He was ahead of his time in that he was an unselfish full forward. It probably would have been perfect today. Reading your book about that, take us through something he would do that was so unselfish that today sound like what every modern player should be doing. Well, it's probably summed up in what the great journalist Hector Lacey, who's in the Hall of Fame, I think this is probably the greatest endorsement for Norm Smith. He said that Norm was the greatest full forward he ever saw, and that's even including John Coleman, Gordon Coventry and Bob Pratt, because he felt that Norm made the forward line function around him, while the other spearheads generally focused on just kicking. Yeah,
they were just
themselves.
Great goal kickers.
So if Pratt kicked, well, probably not Pratt 150, can't beat that, but if Coleman kicked 100 or 120, he probably wasn't creating as many other goals, whereas Norm Smith might kick 80 but create 2 or 3 times that, they reckon.
Yeah. So he'd be quick handballs. He was known amazingly. Apparently, you say in the book, a minute he got the ball, all the forwards would start going, Norm, Norm, Norm. And someone described it in one of your interviews as like chicks wanting a feed. He was such he was such an accurate passer of the ball. And drop kicks weren't used as often back then either.
He used it all the time.
Exclusively, basically.
Exclusively, under all circumstances.
Which today is the case, pretty much. But was nowhere near that back then, was it?
Drop kick, not a drop punch.
Oh, he'd use a drop kick, sorry. Yeah, right, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's some amazing stuff about... it was one of his teammates told me about a final against the Bulldogs, and there was only a few points in it late in the game, and Norm was hemmed in on the boundary line on the wrong side for a right footer, about 40 yards out, 35 metres. And the fellow went up to Norm and said, Norm, make sure you kick this, please, mate. And Norm just turned to him and said, don't let it worry you. And he just went back and drop kicked it through and bent it in the air. How do you bend a drop kick?
I know.
I mean, but he knew how to do it.
I can't even do a drop kick, and I've tried before.
But that, I just thought further on Norm as a player. I mean, he kicked 12 goals, 10 in one game, and that was, I think it was 12 out of 17 goals.
Yeah.
Another game against Footscray, and that was a close game as well. It wasn't like you're beating up on the bottom team.
Yeah.
And, in 1944, he was also regarded as the best player in the league. Obviously, teams were diluted because of the war, and the Brownlow wasn't awarded that year and for a few years around that time, but they reckon if it was,
he'd have won
possibly would have won it.
He did things like, you mentioned, he would, as full forward, and this shows both a team first approach, and Checker was involved in these plannings too, but the fact Norm was so willing to do it, he would do things that would mean he wouldn't kick any goals.
Yep.
So not just like...
It was a decoy.
So he would do the thing that now you see, or it's definitely in the 90s, I remember this being talked about a lot, is he would play at full forward and lead the full back right up to the centre or up onto the members' wing of the MCG to just get them out of the way. And they would... That was back in the... Yeah, and that was back in the day where the full back stuck to the full forward no matter what. It was a bit like with junior footy days, you know. There wasn't just everyone follow the ball. There was zone defences or anything like that.
Well, initially, fullbacks were confused by this whole situation. They think, what is this bloke doing? He must be mad. He's running up the ground like he's got a chook with its head cut off. But it was actually a system, and he'd lead up, create space behind blokes like Mueller and Baggett would run back towards the square, almost like a Pagan's paddock, or like they do now. They've got players running back towards goal, and if Norm didn't get it, someone else would. He'd be like he was ahead of his time with handball as well, which wasn't often used back then, only to sort of get out of trouble. But he'd do this to Jack Regan. I think that pronunciation of that's right.
Yeah, the
Regan,
Collingwood
Collingwood
fullback
champ, and he was the prince of fullbacks. But Norm would lead him up to the centre. He'd lead him walkabout. I think some of the.
I think there was one game where they said Norm basically walked into the members' stand, took a seat, and he had to go with him basically.
I mean, how unselfish is that?
And I think Baggett ended up kicking 6 that day or something against the best defence in basically the league.
But back then, people would look at, okay, you've played full forward, but you've only kicked 2 or 3 goals.
Yeah.
Oh, gee, you must have had a pretty average game when everyone else kicked 3 and 4 or whatever. Well, he's made these other guys.
And it seems he really was the coach of the full forward line. So he would tell players where to lead and what to do. They would switch defenders on purpose or switch roles. So he would and Baggett would have a thing where they'd sort of just wink at each other, and Baggett would go to full forward and Norm would go to half forward, and then they'd swap. And this was like people weren't doing this.
No.
Like this was new stuff at the time.
They were sharp, and this is like, don't forget, this isn't full time football. They haven't got all this time to think about these things and hatch them and then train them and become familiar with it. These guys did it. They were just so sharp, and they were so versatile as players. Norm wasn't overly quick, but they were fairly athletic and good in the air and on the ground.
Yeah, because he was 6 foot, which was tall at the time.
Yeah,
relatively tall. I mean, you to hear a lot of players around then that were 5'6" and
6
things like that.
Then was probably 6'3" now or 6'4" now, I'd imagine. Key position player.
Yeah. Not many 6 foot key position players these days.
But he was also a tough player too. So blokes, he had the bluff of some blokes, and he wouldn't take any nonsense from the backman.
Yeah, he's pretty fiery. Yeah. One thing I found interesting is he both met Ron Barassi Sr. at this time. Not that Ron Barassi a lot of people know, but his father, who was playing in that side. And Ron Barassi came, you mentioned Melbourne were the first club to form a coterie of businessmen back then to basically raise money for the club. But the other benefit is, especially in the Depression, they could offer jobs. Yeah. There were no environmental ambassador roles back then, I imagine.
No, Juddy. Yeah.
But there were all sorts of jobs, and it was a big edge for the Melbourne Football Club, wasn't it, having that coterie at the time to sign great players.
Yeah, and like Miller's Rope Works was a big Melbourne footy club stronghold as well, and both Smith brothers worked there. Barassi ended up working there. I'm not sure if his father did or what, but it's just an enormous advantage. I mean, and if you're trying to get recruits as well, which,
come play for us and we'll get you a full-time job.
And play every second week at the MCG. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that.
Well, you could argue Melbourne have never been the same since we can't just offer everyone jobs.
Well, you might have struck on something.
It's a problem with being an establishment club, but where you can't use the power of incumbency. Yeah. So you met Rob Barassi from the very close relationship, which becomes important later. He then has his first premiership win, 1939, over Collingwood. That was the start of really an era of dominance by the Melbourne Football Club.
From there to 1964, with 25 seasons, 10 premierships. Yeah. 4 as a player and 6 coaches.
I remember it well.
It's remarkable, really.
The good old days. In 1940, he played in another grand final, but before that, in the lead up to the grand final, I think it was the semi-final, they came up against Richmond. Now, Richmond were not a good side compared to Melbourne in terms of skill and on paper. So it was seen as Melbourne were going to probably walk away with this. Yeah. And Richmond basically decided to play as hard and tough as you could, and they had a player by the name of Jack Dyer.
An unknown. Yeah.
And what did Jack Dyer do to Norm?
He ran straight through him. Norm believed it was with a raised forearm. However, I think it was about, and it was always a point of contention between them both, and they'd often almost come to blows during social occasions about it. Would you believe?
And they were actually quite mates, weren't they?
Yeah,
so even though big mates, they still would come to almost blows.
I think it was about 25 years later where Jack showed Norm his teeth marks still on his shoulder, and he said, "Well, okay." Now he's convinced that he didn't raise his elbow, but it knocked Norm into out in the universe there, and he was all
he was heavily concussed, wasn't he? He was off to hospital.
Yeah, these days he wouldn't have played.
He played on for a little bit,
week, yeah,
and they said finally even he couldn't keep going.
A free kick from that incident, and Ron Baggett had to point him in the right direction of the goal.
Well, I think Baggett was actually a bit injured, a bit concussed too, because Richmond were really hitting everyone in this game, and and Norm said, very concussed, which direction, mate? And he said, any direction, mate. He just had no idea what was. So Richmond won that game because they really, and Norm was off to hospital. They had to play the prelim next week. He shouldn't have played, should he?
No,
like you were saying, this year he wouldn't, but...
No. You wonder what they did. The effects of these kinds of things. If you cop a knock the next week, you're in all sorts, really. But the fortnight after that semi-final, the roles were reversed. Dyer crunched into Smithy again.
Yeah, and this is in the grand final.
It didn't quite have it hurt, but it shook him up, but it didn't quite have the effect of sending him off the ground. And Norm kicked 7 in the grand final.
7 that was his sort of great moment.
That was the revenge. Yeah.
And Dyer actually said he just can't believe that Smith got back up for those the prelim and the grand final. I mean, this is the tough. Captain Blood, arguably the toughest player that's ever played.
And he hit him hard.
And he said he just could not believe Norm got back, and it was testament to. Yeah. He thought the voodoo of whatever Melbourne doctors were doing, but mainly he says the guts of Norm Smith, how tough he was, that he just
there's no doubt about that. And there were times there where I had Stan Rule, one of the former Melbourne players. He told me that one time in the rooms before a game, Norm had a sore stomach, and he thought this is most unusual. He was sort of grimacing a little bit. What's the matter? No, I'll be right. Anyway, I think at the end of the game or the following week, Norm was out with he had to have his appendix removed.
So he played a game with appendicitis.
Yeah. So and he often had knee injuries and hamstring injuries. I think hamstring injuries finished his career, but that night, the 1948 series were him and Mueller, which is just a legendary effort. It's probably one of the greatest. It is. This was a miracle premiership. It was
Essendon
called. Was going.
So just to set that up, they won in 1941 again. So they won 3 in a row premierships. Then he didn't go. Then war was well and truly. It had already broken out, but it was well and truly going. But then Melbourne had the most players go and represent or go and enlist.
Otherwise, they could have won.
Broke up this amazing team. So they really struggled throughout the war years. They had a lot of players die, including Ron Barassi Senior passed away overseas. It was killed, and so it decimated the Melbourne Football Club more than any other club because they were also like the club, the establishment. It was often some of these. They felt this duty to king and country and all these sort of things. So it wiped that out. And so Norm couldn't go, could he? Why couldn't Norm go to war? It was kind of a strange...
He's in what I'm told is in a protected industry.
Which was the rope.
No, actually...
was it the rope one?
His father died.
Yes.
And he ran a pram parts business.
Right.
From the back of the home there in Northcote. And Norm had taken that business over. And so it was, basically making pram parts, and that was part of a protected industry.
So all the steel and stuff was, anyone working in that.
But they reckon, people say, that if he'd gone, it might have saved his life because he was so sort of headstrong and leading the charge.
Yeah, he's that sort of person.
So
So it was strange at that time not to go. So then you got it. 1948. 1948, he goes to. They have this miracle grand final, and you mentioned this. Why was it a miracle grand final? Because it had no success since 41 in terms of premierships.
Yeah, well, Essendon was such a great side. Dick Reynolds, his coach, had Bill Hutchinson and a number of other champions there. And Essendon had beaten Melbourne easily in each of their games during the season. And Norm Smith and Jack Mueller, the two veteran forwards, were both injured at different times, and it was very strategic as to when to bring back Jack Mueller, because they reckon he only had a finite amount of games left in him.
Right. And Checker Hughes was back coaching for this season.
He was back coaching this year, and this was probably his greatest achievement as a coach.
And Norm had been appointed captain.
But
then he'd resign. Did he resign?
No, they just replaced him with Don Cordner. Without speaking to him. They did things a little bit differently back then, and Don Cordner actually was jogging a lap with Norm and said,
I've been named captain.
I'll only accept it if you sort of...
Well, that said, we just found out today as we're recording this that the American Secretary of State got sacked in a tweet. Well, so it doesn't change that much sometimes.
Yeah, well, and pushing ahead later on, Norm was sacked by a courier, telegram sent by a courier. But, so getting back to it, I mean, it was just the most... That and 1958.
This was 48. There was no chance of them really winning in everyone's mind, and they come up against
Essendon, and the only way they drew the game really was Essendon kicked 7 goals, 27, and drew the game. But a lot of those shots were missed. The Melbourne fellas say because of the pressure they applied and so forth. But a key to it was Smith and Mueller, the two old foxes, and Smithy would work about 60, 70 metres out from goal, get it, and then feed Mueller. And Mueller kicked about 20 goals in 3 finals, and Smith was just dominant. They ended up winning the replay easily.
So this was his sort of swan song. This was really his peak as a final moment in the sun. Because then he went off. He wanted to be because Checker Hughes had retired. He did want to become coach, and he applied. He missed out on one vote for becoming Melbourne coach.
Never forgave the bloke who cast that vote as well. And, he missed out to Alan LaFontaine, who'd been the captain during the 39 to 41 period, and Alan LaFontaine was a champion, and people say he had a fantastic football brain. However, the way he delivered the message probably left a little bit to be desired.
The management side of things.
He flawed genius, so to speak. He didn't have the people skills.
Perhaps. Right. So Norm goes off to Fitzroy to be captain coach.
They initially wanted Ponce Kine from Collingwood, but Collingwood wouldn't release him because they were thinking, we've got our own succession plan with Ponce to take over from Jock McHale. But so Norm gets the job there, coaches 3 years, doesn't make the finals, finishes, it was a top 4 then, finished 5th twice, bit stiff on occasions, and then Melbourne wanted him back, and so they got him back for 1952. And he started off promisingly. The next year had a bad year, and they almost sacked him.
How close did they get to sacking him?
Well, Norm reckons very close.
Because he had a few close calls, because he almost got let go as a player in his initial sort of year at Melbourne too, didn't he? So there's a few moments here where you kind of, it could have been very different.
Sliding doors moments here. I don't like to think of what-ifs a lot, but there are a number of what-ifs in the Norm Smith story. So at the end of 53, they finished down near the bottom. And the next year, when he's got the pressure, he's got to finally deliver. They were 6-6. And with 6 rounds, I think it was just 18 round season, 6 rounds to go. And how is this going to play out? If he fails,
he's probably gone.
Might be on, he might be on the chopping block. Well, they started the run of wins, ended up in the grand final, 1954 grand final, and the rest is history. And they lost that grand final, but it started their run. But the key to that was, he had a lot of good young players that he brought into the team, and they were starting to really show great promise. And guys like Barassi and Stuart Spencer and Big Bob Johnson, and the Barassi ruck rover role, he started playing that towards the end of 54.
And Barassi had lived Well, Barassi
Yes.
was very close to the Smiths because his dad had passed away.
Yep.
And I think Norm was at their house when they found out
Yeah, it was.
that Barassi Senior had been killed in the war.
Ron was only 5 or 6 years old, but he can remember. I think he describes it as a scene of devastation.
Yeah.
That he'd never seen before or since, and he saw Norm was consoling his mother, and she was just beside herself. And thereafter, Norm basically looked upon it himself as almost a surrogate father of.
They're incredibly close for
Ron Barassi, young Ron, and eventually, he got Ron to his mother. Ron's mother remarried and moved to Tasmania, and Norm thought it'd be a terrible tragedy if Ron didn't come and play for Melbourne if he had the ability to do it. So got him to live under his own roof in Pascoe Vale, and that just strengthened the relationship even more. And got an interesting relationship because it continued on until living under the same roof until he was in a bungalow until Ron was married and moved out. But by then he was the biggest name in footy pretty much. And very interesting relationship because Barassi was often Norm's favourite whipping boy when it came to trying to get a lift out of the team.
Yeah, he was hardest on those he thought could sort of take it, didn't he?
Yes. And he thought his theory was that if I give it to the best player, how are the other blokes going to feel?
Right.
They're all going to be on notice.
So I'm not even playing as well as him.
I mean, it wore a bit thin on certain blokes, but...
How epic were these rants or these sprays he would give people?
Yeah, probably peel paint off the walls kind of thing. There were other players sitting back going, gee, I feel sorry for the poor bugger.
Yeah.
But invariably, it'd be at half time or something like that, or even before a game, and that player would come out and just, in spite of Norm, I think Hassaman was best on ground to half time of the game, but he missed one shot just before half time, and that was the one little thing that Norm sort of used as a lever, and he went crazy at Hassa at half time, and after half time Hassa envisioned the ball being Norm's head, and after Norm said, well, there you go, it worked.
Yeah.
But probably one of the best ones, and it's probably a low down dirty trick by Norm, if you can humour me here, Titus. In 1964, it was a very difficult year. This was like a real push for the premiership. They hadn't won one since 1960. They'd been close.
A whole 4 years.
Yep, whole 4 years.
I wish we had that problem now.
That's right. After winning 3 in a row from 55 to 57, losing 58, winning 59, 60, and then a finalist in between. But it was always going to be a difficult year. They'd won games by tight margins, and they didn't have real superstars apart from. Well, Barassi was getting towards the end of his career, and Norm just had to pull some dirty trick, and he did it at the pre-finals dinner at the MCG, and it was all about he'd seen something in the showers. Would you believe? Back then, players would have baths together. There'd be a few baths. Two blokes would sit in the bath. Doesn't sound much chop these days, but there was Louis Adams sitting there in one bath. There was a veteran. There was a first-year player, Frank Davis, sitting in one of the other baths. Brian Dixon, one of the oldest players in the team, comes and sits in the bath with his mate, Louis Adams. Norm was having a shower at the time. He saw it, and he just thought to himself that Brian should have sat in the bath with Frank Davis just to get to know him a bit better, just to talk to him, give him a bit of advice and whatnot. So at the pre-finals dinner, Norm made a speech and said, there's two players in this room who have let this club down like no one else has ever done before. And their names are, Brian Dixon and Frank Adams, and Dicko and Bluey. They basically dropped the cutlery. They couldn't believe what was going on. Yeah. They knew what it was about. And anyway, those two blokes were the two best players for Melbourne in the finals. And after the premiership
so we sort of just publicly shamed them, basically.
Basically, yeah. And, so after the finals, Dicko went up to Norm and said, now, Norm, I think what you did there was most unfair and, harming our reputations and so forth. And Norm said, now, who were the two best players in the final, Brian? He said, well, me and Bluey. He said, well, there you go, you just answered your own question. And he walked off and left him there. So they had a very interesting relationship.
So you mentioned this, that he won 6 premierships in this period as Melbourne coach. It's, an almost unprecedented run of success. 55, 56, 57, 59, 60 as well, and then 1964. They say 56 was the greatest side of all out of all of those?
Yeah. They...
the people you interviewed, they seem to have that view?
That's unanimous, yeah. It was where they still had, like, Noel McMahon was still playing. Because the next year they lost basically 6 great players. They lost Dennis Cordner, who retired, who was a superstar ruckman. Yeah. Noel McMahon, the champion halfback flanker, the captain, he retired.
Yeah.
Stewie Spencer went to Tasmania. He was the best rover in Australia. There were a couple of others as well that just would have torn the heart out of any other club. But again, Melbourne...
They still win in 57 and then 59 as well.
Should have won 58. Won 59.
Yeah, 58 was the one that still hurts me. Because they would have won... They would have been, 6 in a row.
Well, could have. They say that if they'd won 58 and equal Collingwood's record, which was a big thing for Norm, seeing he'd supported
that's right.
As a boy, and then they'd become the enemy. They reckon that maybe that would have been enough for them. But then the push would have been, come on, we need to get 5 in a row and beat their record.
Yeah.
Come on, we need to get... So how many times do you keep going back to the well? And
you would have never known, but it was an amazing run.
It is, yeah.
So he's that great a coach, like the best in the league by a mile, really, at the time. And you would have thought he was coach for life, really, at this point, wouldn't you? But there were things going on behind the scenes that eventually led to Norm becoming a cropper, basically. What were those things? Brassy was going to Carlton. What else was what was going on around that? And what was going on?
But it's probably important to say before I get into that is that there was unbelievable leadership at Melbourne. It's probably unprecedented in the history of the game. I mean, I've just been for the footy record, I've been interviewing Damien Hardwick and whatnot, and he's saying the premiership is won by a club, and that's from the top down and all this sort of stuff. And it was exactly the same at Melbourne. I mean, they had Bert Chadwick as president, Sir Bert. He was a great leader of industry. He'd gone to war. He'd been a captain coach for Premiership. He captain coached Victoria. I think he's probably the greatest president of the time. Jim Cardwell was a fantastic secretary. Ivor Warren Smith was chairman of selectors.
Yeah.
I mean, dual Brownlow medalist. And later, when Ivor died, Dennis Cordner took over from him. So he's a great succession plan. And Norm also had Checker Hughes as his right-hand man until Checker spoke up on the bench one time, and Norm said, "That's enough from you, Checker. Off you go up into the stands." That's another story in itself. And he also had Noel McMahon as captain, which it's an amazing relationship between them. There's no real fondness between the two. However, they got results, and they were so inextricably linked. So having said all that...
So you had all these people around the Melbourne Football Club, this culture, but also who were used to winning. They knew how to win premierships.
Yep.
Success built on success.
Yep. But the thing was, Norm always... the story of his sacking was... I think it's just one of the biggest blunders of all time.
Well, the sacking is just, even reading now, it's almost impossible to imagine how it got to him being sacked, because it was certainly not based on really on-field results, was it?
No, completely not. I think it's the biggest story in footy history, but I'm unashamedly biased. I think the committee stuffed it up. Norm had always had a testy relationship with the committee, but with Bert Chadwick in charge, he generally kept Norm under control.
Yeah.
They'd butt heads a lot,
but Norm wanted them to stay out of the day-to-day running of the team.
Yes,
it reminds me a bit of Clarkson and Kennett's relationship in many ways. Like they're the closest modern-day version I can think of what this was like. Reading your book, it sort of struck me, that relationship of the committee men would give their views to Norm of how the team should be running, and Norm was very much like, get out of my way.
Yeah, I mean, he was always fighting for the best situation for his players and different facilities and whatnot. But when Chadwick stepped down from from the footy club to become president of the Melbourne Cricket Club. Things changed. It left a huge hole, and it didn't seem there was anyone really strong enough to keep Norm in check after that. I mean, he was unhappy that the club become. He thought they were lazy and complacent because they hadn't recruited well enough, and the MCC controlled the purse strings, and they refused to keep up with the times by paying for decent money for players like other clubs did. So
right.
Norm was getting frustrated. You could see there was going to be a decline, and hence probably that story about Bluey and Dicko, that he had to pull any trick. But I mean, it all blew up after there was a game in 1964 against St Kilda when Norm was upset with the umpiring, and he said on the radio that the umpire had been subconsciously biased towards the underdog. Some people have misconstrued that as him calling the umpire a cheat.
Yes.
He sort of worded it in a different way.
Right.
The umpire issued a writ for defamation, and Norm, he wanted the club to...
Which is a pretty amazing story in itself. An umpire suing a
coach.
The best coach, the most famous coach in the league for defamation.
It was a young umpire too, but the club wouldn't back Norm financially for it, so Norm... They
left him to his own devices. They basically said, you said it,
yep.
You defend it.
They morally support him, but they refused to financially support him.
Right.
Norm thought, if I've done anything for this club, surely you can owe me this. I've got some brownie points. So, but in the meantime, Norm took Melbourne to the 64 flag, but then things just deteriorated next year to the point where Norm was asked to front a committee meeting. He thought he was going to be sacked right there and then, but he wasn't. He kept his powder dry. He restrained himself for one of the few times.
Yeah.
And he was told that he had to tell the players he fully supported the committee because he had been previously speaking out around the bar and so forth.
Right.
But there was no deadline set on when he should actually tell the players that he fully supports the committee. Right. So this is a key point to it.
So he read the legal loophole in this, did he?
Well, yeah, it wasn't. I'd say the wording left a little bit of an out. Because unbeknown to Norm, I mean, the committee expected him to do it at the next opportunity, which was Thursday night training session. So when he didn't say that he fully supports the committee saw that as an act of rebellion, and they basically sacked him. They asked a couple of players as they were walking off the ground, what did Norm say, or did he say this, or didn't they? And that was the extent of their investigation when it should have gone.
Right, they didn't go to Norm and say, why didn't you say it? And he could have said, well, I'm not doing it tonight, I'm doing it this day or something.
So it was total miscommunication and misinterpretation.
It sounded like they wanted to sack him though and were looking for any opportunity.
Possibly. However, there's ways, and Norm was his own worst enemy, no doubt about that.
Well, he was volatile, wasn't he?
He was volatile. He admits that he didn't always get things right, and he butted heads with people, but they should have given him the opportunity to defend himself and speak up in front of the committee.
And we've got to remember, this is after he's won them 6 premierships, plus being one of the all-time great players.
And they were 9-3. Right. They'd won the first 8 games.
So they'd won 1964. They were premiers, and then they were 9 and
zip. 8 and zip. They'd won by small margins, so it was a little bit inflated their position. And Norm could see things were still slipping there.
Yeah. But they weren't bottoming out.
They lost 3
out
of 4. They were still slipping, but they were 9-3. And they were right near the top. And, have you seen the Tony Charlton?
I have, yeah. So he gets sacked by Courier. Courier shows up.
Yeah, it was
at his home.
Female courier, a woman courier turned up, which is unusual for back then, I'm led to believe. And he was just about to watch a movie.
Yeah.
With his wife and one of the players, the ruckman Graham Wise. And there was a ring at the doorbell. Norm was on the phone actually to Hassaman, just discussing what the next game, the conditions. They were playing North Melbourne at Coburg.
Right.
The first time they'd be playing at Coburg, and he said, "Hold on, someone's at the door." About 8 o'clock at night, and he was handed this telegram and said, "Your coaching position has been terminated," and he was in complete shock. And basically, I spoke to 2 of the members of the committee, Don Cordner, who voted against Norm being
sacked. Yeah.
It was a 9-3 vote. There was Don Cordner, Checker Hughes voted not to have Norm sacked, and there was one other, Shane McGrath, who was an old mate of Norm's on the committee. But also, I spoke to the other one I spoke to was Terry Gleeson. He's not neither Terry Gleeson nor Don Cordner are with us anymore. They've died in subsequent years.
Mm.
And also, Ian Ridley was the assistant secretary. He was the minutes secretary.
Mm.
He didn't even know if he should actually be taking notes. He thought, this is just almost blasphemy. I shouldn't be taking notes on this thing. It was just, and he basically said once the letter was written and signed and approved, it was basically batten down the hatches and wait for the news to break.
So what were the reasons given by the committee? They just thought Norm had got bigger than the club in many ways, but it seemed to be more a personal thing. Like they felt he was challenging. It was him or them in a way.
They said that he lied.
That not committing to them
by not that he said he would.
But to even get to that permission, it seemed like that position. It seemed like it had become a personal him against us. It's either he goes or we go kind of thing.
There was definitely a feeling that he was becoming bigger than the club, and there were the occasional push and shove, almost coming to blows with the committeeman at one stage. There was it was getting really snippy.
Yeah.
And it was coming to a head, and Norm admits that. But I think there's ways and means the way they could have done it.
So Tony Charlton, who was the big at his own TV show the next day, big AF, he's on the
So that was the Friday night when he got sacked.
Yeah,
and Sunday morning.
Everyone wanted to talk to him, the whole media. It was the biggest story at the time. And Tony Charlton, I think he's in the AFL Hall of Fame now, I believe. Yes. I think I was at that when he got inducted.
He's no longer with us either.
No, and he had his own show, and he got Norm to appear on it on the Sunday morning, and that's on YouTube, isn't it? That footage, I believe, not the whole thing, but
2 or 3 minute clip. I've got the full about 45 or 50 minutes, including ads, which it's an amazing production. I mean, you take away Tony Charlton said a bit of an amateurish kind of thing, and he's a little bit embarrassed about some of it. I don't know why, because I reckon
it's very raw.
Apart from the graphics and the things like that, and the like funeral music they sort of played at the start. I think news services today couldn't have done it much better.
Well, you wouldn't almost get that level of honesty and time with a coach in that position. They normally would just go disappear.
If Alistair Clarkson was sacked now, and him coming out on the footy show and just letting rip, and
and it's a 45-minute to 50-minute production,
and they covered it from all different angles as well. I mean, Melbourne players were told by the committee, do not go in and talk on that show. You are not, otherwise. And Hassan was told you might jeopardise your captaincy if you go in and talk on this show.
Right.
Him and 2 or 3 other blokes went in there and spoke. They were so
the players were loyal
to Norm, and it went both ways. And even Barassi was coaching Carlton at that stage. He'd turn up at Jim Cardwell's house and went yelling and screaming at his house, and he had his kids sitting in the car waiting for him, tooting the horn and everything like that. He went into Tony Charlton's show and said how shocking it was, and they spoke to all sorts of people and spoke to his brother Len, and they had a wake the night before on the Saturday night. It was basically a wake for for Norm's footy.
And the fans, the Melbourne fans?
Yeah, the fans, they were in absolute shock. It was, I don't think there were
I mean, this would be the equivalent of Clarkson being fired by Jeff Kennett this year.
Yeah.
You would just get the fans going.
We had the added thing as well that Norm had played for the club as well. He'd been a champion player, so people loved him as a player. 7
goals in a grand final.
And he's the coach. So, I mean, Clarkson, great coach as he is, he never played for Hawthorn. So it's this long attachment to this bloke.
It's like almost attaching, if you combine Jason Dunstall and Alistair Clarkson into one person.
That's probably
basically what you have in Norm for what he meant for the Melbourne Football Club. Yeah. So he gets reinstated after this because the pressure, the kickback on the committee is so intense, isn't it?
Well, there was some powerful people who were supporting Norm, including Judge Trevor Rapke. There was a few other legal people who were involved with Melbourne Footy Club who started doing some work behind the scenes
and coterie members and things like this. This was like they had done something that the committee had overstepped, really, hadn't overreached.
Well, I think they were way too hasty. That's
They hadn't built the case against him enough.
They needed to, that's right. They needed to get the starters, get Norm in and put things to him and let him speak for himself. They needed to get more information from players. They needed to do far more investigation.
They forget these clubs. Like, the clubs are built to win. If they don't win, if they're winning, he won. So people didn't really care if. My view of reading your book again, but the way people reacted was they were like, Norm's delivered us 10 premierships over that you've been involved. He's delivered us 6 as coach. That's all we want. We don't care if he gets along with you guys or not. We really don't care that much. If we would prefer to be winning grand finals and he's yelling at you guys than not be winning grand finals, but you guys are kind of happy.
Although they still have to work with him, so there's a happy medium somewhere.
I know, but I'm just saying for the average punter,
the average punter,
and a lot of the people in the coda in that, they were like, I care about the results. I don't.
That's right. Yeah.
So he gets reinstated, but it's not the same, is it?
No. This whole thing.
It's broken.
Within 4 days, about 100 hours it was from the time he was sacked to the time he was reinstated on 11 o'clock on Tuesday night.
Is it fair to say he kind of broke him a bit?
Oh, no doubt. And
even the reinstatement didn't fix anything. In fact, but he was damaged guy after this.
Damage was done.
His heart wasn't in that.
No, there was suspicion from. It was almost the Cold War that continued between Norm and the committee men. He often, previous to that, liked to go into the committee room and have drinks after training and after games and so forth. That stopped. He became more introverted and more focused towards the players, bit of us and them. When you need to be pulling in the same direction, and there's no coincidence that Melbourne, for other reasons as well, recruiting and so forth, that they just dropped off the perch after.
Yeah, and since his dismissal, the Demons didn't make the finals again. Just the finals, not grand final, just the finals till 1987.
Yeah.
And they haven't won a premiership next, and nor have they really gone close. I mean, they got into 2, but they got smashed in both of them.
Well, they say that some call it the curse of
I was about to ask you about the curse.
I don't get into that kind of stuff.
You don't believe in the curse of Norm Smith? Because I don't believe in anything spiritual except the curse of Norm Smith, because so many things have happened, over the years that you kind of go, this is almost a cursed club. But I guess the reverse of it is something broke in the Melbourne Football Club with Norm sacking and subsequent leaving. And it went from a culture of winning, where you mentioned before all the people that were around the Melbourne Football Club, every one of them had been involved in multiple premierships, not just one. It reminds me a bit of what Hawthorn are now. So even the people around them, they both expect and know what the standards are and what is expected. It's not just Alistair Clarkson, it's the boot stutter, it's the chair, it's the the coterie, the fans don't expect anything. Melbourne went from being a club that everyone involved was expecting that and worked towards it to suddenly a bit of a rabble. Some of their recruiting and what they used to be able to do, some of their natural advantages were slowly eroding as well. But suddenly you find in the modern day, people, when Melbourne keep trying to rebuild, they go to their, heroes. So Gary Lyons dragged in, or these are people that have never been really near a premiership. They no longer have that. And it's funny that they've kind of had to go and now bring in people like Peter Jackson and others who are very non-Melbourne people to start to turn it around. But it's been it did sort of break the club, didn't it? Whether you believe in a curse or not.
Well, in some ways, it could have been a cyclical thing, because you had those, as I say, those leaders, that backbone of strength or backbone of steel that they called it with Chadwick, and Cardwell was there through that period, which I think his decision making through the sacking period is very questionable. However, it's a very heated time. But you lose Ivor Warne-Smith, you lose Checker Hughes. These guys are legends of the club. Probably the best at what they were doing at that time that any club has ever had to that point. Once you lose guys of that quality, it's inevitable.
How did the committee hold on though? How were they not moved? Like, how was there not a focus on footy ticket challenge? I mean, it's amazing to me, because that kind of, I would have thought that not like with Norm then back, a spill of the board or the committee would have been almost inevitable.
Yeah. It was pretty much the same group of guys on the committee that remained.
Yeah.
Although, strangely, when Norm, he coached for another 2 years, and in the second year, 67, is 2 years after the sacking, he started having heart problems and decided it's time to quit coaching for his health reasons. He decided he wanted to either help the club in recruiting or in a role on the committee.
Yeah.
He actually ran for the committee. They formed a ticket against him to keep him off.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was still, and that was probably even a greater shock and hurt to him
Than the actual sacking.
Because that was almost severing ties. I'm not going back.
Yeah, we don't want you involved at all.
No, I'm not going back to this club.
And he had lived and breathed the Melbourne Football Club all this time.
Melbourne through and through. That's what he said.
So then he surprisingly took an offer to coach South Melbourne in 69. Now, he had some success here because South Melbourne, obviously, now Sydney, they were a run-down club in many ways. They didn't have a lot of the resources or help that Melbourne had. He'd gone from the powerhouse club to a club that was really struggling and had not done well for a long time. One of his best coaching performances, though, is he took them to the 1970 semi-final. So he still had it. He still had it a bit.
He certainly did, and they rave about him. The fellas who were part of that 1970 campaign. I mean, it's interesting how Norm got the job. He had a year off. 1968 was a year off, and then South were looking for a coach, and the president, Brian Burke, who'd been part of Ronald Ryan's defence team, the last man hanged in Australia. He was the president. He told the secretary to go and speak to Norm Smith, see what he thinks. He knows more about coaching than anyone.
Yeah.
The secretary called Brian Burke back and said, I think we might have found our coach. And Norm was interested in it, and they got him involved. Blokes like Skilton, and they're just so grateful to him because Skilton, it was the only final he ever played. It was 1970. But, a great story about Norm's time at South was when he was originally presented to the members at the South Melbourne AGM. The end would have been the end of 1968 or early 1969. There were two notable absentees, two very good players, Mopsy Rantel and Paul Harrison, and it was found out that they'd been at a party or held their own party at their house. They lived above a supermarket or something, I think. And
right.
I think they might have had the bath so full of ice that it seeped down and destroyed a lot of the groceries downstairs. But anyway, they lived together with this other mate of theirs who went to university. And Norm decided early next morning he turned up unannounced. The mate, Sandy Grant, turned up, answered the door in his jocks, which wasn't a great first impression. And Norm pushed his way in and told Sandy Grant, I've heard you got a big mouth, so you shut up. The joint was a pigsty, so he got Rantel and Harrison out of their beds and made them sit there on the couch and forced them to listen to about a 30-minute lecture, basically saying that they were wasting their ability and if they don't pull their fingers out, they should give it away. And Norm even had a go at Sandy Grant and told him, I've heard you've got some semblance of intelligence. Why don't you sort of get back to university and make something of your life? So these three guys decided they better think about this and over a counter meal at the pub, of course, and a few beers. And Harrison, he disregarded Norm's advice. He sort of continued to burn the candle at both ends, and his league career was over within 2 years. Rantel took the opposite attitude. He committed himself to what Norm was saying, and Mopsy reckons that if Norm hadn't kicked him up the backside at that time, he might have only played 140. As it was, he played 340 and became an all-time great. And to top it off, Sandy Grant, the mate, returned to uni and he went to become a high-flying sort of corporate businessman, and he's never forgotten those words that Norm Smith said to him. So Norm Smith was a life coach.
Yeah, there's a lot of people he influenced over that, in a huge way. He coached a bit on there, but they were under-resourced, and I think Norm's health and various things weren't what they were. He resigned in 1972. On the 29th of July 1973, he was at home in Pascoe Vale, and he died of a cerebral tumour. huge impact on the Melbourne community. He's passing away, wasn't it? And Victorian and the footy community.
Well, he's only 57.
Very young.
We think of Norm Smith.
57 seems old back then too, though, compared to now.
But compared to now, that's right.
Yeah.
I hope it's not that old. Only 15 years away from it. But 57, we think of Norm in our mind's eye that he was this really old oracle of football.
Yeah.
57.
Still, very young man, really.
Wasn't that old. And I mean, his funeral was just so well attended, and one of his former players, Ken Melville, centreman for Melbourne in one of the two of the premierships in the 50s. He was a priest, and he delivered the main eulogy in the service. And I mean, Norm had already, before he was diagnosed with a tumour, he was helping out Barassi. He was going to be Barassi's chairman of selectors at North Melbourne.
Right.
So that would have been an interesting dynamic, but it was only he only went there a few times before he became sick. So you wonder what.
Did they know that he had the tumour, or was it diagnosed, or was it just unbeknownst and it was only after the fact?
It was diagnosed, but they don't know how long he had it for.
Right.
Don Cordner, who was a doctor, Dr. Don. It's not his area of expertise, but he believed that perhaps he knows there was a change in Norm's personality a little bit.
Right.
He remembered Norm as it's a sensitive issue, but he noticed that Norm was such a pleasant gentleman as a player.
Yeah.
When he became a coach, and he was always stressed, tense, highly volatile. He thinks it might have been around for a number of years.
Yes, we don't really know what impact. Yeah.
So, but these are things we can only
sort of speculate.
Yeah.
Well, it's an amazing story. After that, in the same year, the VFL honoured him by naming the Norm Smith Medal after for the best player in the grand final, and remains to this day. It's an amazing book. Thanks for coming in. The book is The Red Fox, the biography of Norm Smith, legendary Melbourne coach. I should add, it's revised and updated. So if you've already got it, it's worth getting it. It's got a great new chapter on sort of the social lives and everything of the players. If you haven't read it, and if you want to just get across this amazing man who influenced football so much, it's well worth getting. It's Slattery Media. It's out now, isn't it? It's in the revised edition and updated version. Buy one for yourself, buy one for your family. I put this next to my bed and read a passage before I go to bed every night.
Very good, Titus. Yeah.
And thanks, Ben, for coming in. Really appreciate it. You got another book lined up at the moment, or what's your plan?
So I've got two young boys, and a girl. I'm trying to write a kids' footy book.
Right, okay.
So hopefully can get that off the ground at some point. Maybe it'll just be us three who read it.
And any plans for another biography like this? Is there anyone out there you'd like to tackle if you got the chance?
Yes, but I'm not.
Or are you not at liberty to say?
Not willing to divulge just yet. Yeah. Well, that's
something to look forward to. Well, thanks for coming in, Ben, and go out and get The Red Fox. It's a terrific book.